Okay, I think I'm getting the high sign from Susan that we're good to start. Yeah, thumbs up there. 35 participants on the screen. It looks just awesome. I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for making this happen. The AGTA forms update has been a tremendous amount of work. Our last lunch and learn was so successful. We're doing it again. We're getting more adventuresome with the IT and the technology. And so those are just two awesome things to consider. But going back to the AGTA forms, along the way, there has been so much support to make this happen. Those of you that have been with us from the beginning will know that in 2016, we met in Red Deer. We divided into groups based on interest to look at the AGTA and enhancements both to the regs and the Act. And working groups were established as a result of that meeting. Along the way, we've had multiple meetings with those working groups, with the testers, and everyone's involvement just at every step of the way. I want to introduce to you today the key people that made all of this happen. The first person is Ellen Nessett, who worked tirelessly with the drafters and back and forth on revisions, changes, and the multiple steps. To Patrick Dems for all of his fantastic ideas on simplifying the trusteeship forms and combining. We couldn't have done that part without you, Patrick, for sure. And to Sherry Zattery, who has been a tester supreme and worked tirelessly with Service Alberta to get these forms to where they are today, so that they work and they look and they act and respond, both for us but also for the public. So thank you. And last but not least, I want to thank Susan West, the manager who's taken this and charged and pushed it over the finish line to actually make this happen, because it was a tremendous amount of work for sure. So collectively, as the team leading it, and then all of the broader OPGT staff, I just want to say thank you. Have a great lunch and learn here today. I think this is just the start of many to come. There's all kinds of topics we can cover. So good luck. And I'm going to dash to a budget discussion. So thanks, everybody, and take care. Bye.
So as you just heard from Barb, this has been a process that's been long in coming. It started at the end of September 2016, and my portion of it flowed from about then until the end of December into the beginning of January 2017, when we handed off our recommendations over to the team and worked a little bit here and there with Ellen about questions that she may have had about some of her recommendations and our forms at that point. But I do want to give credit where credit is due. Certainly Susan Wright and Caitlin Jimmo in Edmonton were instrumental in the revisions to the financial forms, so the inventory, the trusteeship plan, and the overview. And I also want to give a special thank you to Nicole Gaudu, who is now over at Vanderleek Law. But she also was very valuable to our team in doing the actual combinations of the draft forms and giving us stuff to look at. And so that's where we really saw how simple it actually was to combine the review forms with the new forms. Was the ultimate goal of the revision, and that's largely what you're going to see today. And that we don't need a separate set of forms anymore to do a new application or a review application. You can do them all in one. And that's very valuable because there were lots of scenarios where we had clients with the Guardian that they were going in for a review and they decided, you know what, this client needs a trustee as well. And you had to do an entirely separate application package to do it. We did see some of our lawyers kind of putting together their own combined forms. They called them a Form 14/19 and did have some success getting those through, but we just wanted to formalize that in the regulations so that it was available to everybody and not just anybody who kind of blazed their own trail. So in addition to the people I mentioned already, we also had Laura Lance, Sarah Dremko, and Julia Woods is our legal counsel on our team, and also other people who I may have consulted with here and there, may have been involved in our meetings once or twice. Certainly couldn't have done it without you. So really appreciate all the hard work that went into this. It was not easy. It certainly took a lot longer, I think, than any of us had anticipated going in. We had a lot of meetings, probably weekly to bi-weekly minimum. A lot of those meetings were at least 2 hours long. So it wasn't easy, but to see it coming out now in a whole new set of regulations and hopefully simplifying lives for everybody, it's very rewarding to see that. So thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Take over next, and sorry for the dog cameo. She doesn't like it when I'm talking to other people and not paying attention to her, so hopefully I can keep her down on the floor. And thank you, Patrick, for that kind of overview of the work groups. I don't have a listing of the names in front of me of all of the folks that were involved on the public guardian kind of aspect of the work groups, but I know that there were many. You guys know who you are, so I just want to extend a very big thank you to everyone part of those work groups. Well, it really was a team OPGT effort, and we put in a lot of work across the organization. As Patrick said, this started a long time ago in the fall of 2016, when we realized that the regulations had been reviewed since they came into force in 2009. So it had been, a number of years at that point. And it was time. So as many of you probably know, we had work groups that really were, instrumental in putting together the recommendations that we put forward to the drafters. We also, at the time, had a one-day session with the assistant personal decision makers, who were very well placed kind of feedback as well, since they were kind of helping private applicants work through the process. So they provided a lot of really great feedback on their end as well. So that was kind of the start of the process. Once we gathered all of the feedback from the work groups, we put them forward to Barb and to the public trustee at the time, Les Hills. They worked with legal to put together kind of a legislative chart that outlined and listed all of the changes that we were going to put forward and request that the legislative drafters make so that we could have new and updated regulations. Not all of the suggestions from the work groups made it through, but we really tried to put forward all of the ones that we could, from a legislative standpoint, and kind of keeping in mind, that we needed legal's kind of blessing for a lot of these to be able to go forward. So once we had that chart outlining our high-level changes that we wanted to make, we got the blessing from the ADM and the DM and kind of other folks up the line. And then the process really started to work with the legislative drafters. And the legislative drafters are the ones who draft the legislation. And so we had many, many meetings over many months with the drafters. And it was really a back and forth process where we really balanced what we wanted sort of change-wise with the knowledge that the legislative drafters have when it comes to legislation and drafting legislation and language and that kind of stuff. So it really was a very iterative sort of back and forth process that took quite a while. But at the end of the day, we got to a point where everybody was happy with the draft regulations, and we were able to put those forward to cabinet to have them review and to proclaim the changes. So I'm just going to pull up the dates here. We have two sets of regulations, as you guys know, that we reviewed. The Adult Guardianship and Trusteeship regulations, that's kind of the big sort of main set of regulations that contains all the application forms for guardianship, trusteeship, co-decision making. And then we also have the Adult Guardianship and Trusteeship Ministerial Regulations, which contains all of the regulated capacity assessment forms. So we had both of those reviewed and changed. And they're both sort of separate processes. So they were proclaimed at different times. So the Adult Guardianship and Trusteeship regulations were proclaimed on May 13th, 2020, by order in council. And then the Adult Guardianship and Trusteeship ministerial regulations were proclaimed just a few weeks later on June 5th, 2020. And they're signed off by ministerial order as opposed to by an order in council. So that's just kind of a difference in terms of the two types of regulations. Now, we did ask for a grace period of 1 year. So the justices will accept the new forms until, or the old forms and both the old forms and the new forms until June 2021. So private applicants who are maybe in the, we're already in the process of drafting up their applications, and we're kind of wherever along the process, when these new forms have come out, they can still submit their applications on those old forms. They'll be accepted by the court until June of next year. Although we are encouraging everyone to start using the new forms for new applications. They're posted individually on our website. So you'll see that we are working to remove all the old application kits and bundles using the old forms. People can kind of go on and find the new forms. So we're really encouraging people to use those new forms, but the courts will still accept those old ones until June 2021. And I think that's my piece. So I'm going to pass this on to Sherry.
Thanks, Ellen. I just noticed first in the chat here that there are some staff that are connecting to a different WebEx. Susan, can I ask that maybe you forward on this current one, maybe out to the general OPGT staff? Not quite sure.
Yeah, will do.
So, like Ellen had said, there was a lot of people involved with getting kind of a final version of the forms. Once we got that from the ledge drafters, then we took that forward to Service Alberta and their forms analysts and got them to start working on the actual PDF documents and putting the forms together, and just working with the talented forms analysts there was quite the experience. So currently these new forms are in a PDF format, but we are going to be working with Service Alberta to have them converted to what's called an XDP format. That XDP format is supposed to make things a bit easier for those people who aren't using Adobe, because you don't need Adobe in order to use those forms. But that will be down in the future sometime. Currently, we've got like Ellen had said, we've got the individual forms on our forms website. Work is being done with web services to get all of the previous application bundles or kits removed from the website and replaced with the new forms. We're also working with Service Alberta to have a application kit, actually 2 application kits put together, one for private applicants and a second one that will be used for public guardian and public trustee applications. And we hope to have those relatively soon so that it'll make things a bit easier for those private applicants. Right now, then, I think what I want to do is sort of bring up the forms and maybe just kind of highlight some of the changes that have been made. And we'll share my screen. Like Patrick had mentioned, the biggest change is combining the forms that are specific to review applications with those corresponding forms that are specific to initial. So the application form, we now have just one application form, Form 14. Form 19 is now obsolete. And while it can be used for that grace period that Ellen had mentioned, we really want to encourage people to start using this new application form. I'm just kind of go highlight through some of the changes that we've made here. We've made some of these spaces bigger to accommodate longer names. In the applicant's address for service, it was recommended to sort of separate these sections. So there's a specific one if they're going through a lawyer, and another section if they're not going through a lawyer. Wherever possible, we've kind of added a collapsible feature. So if this section is not applicable, and they can check that box, and it'll help kind of clean up the form a bit. The definitions for desk and hearing have been somewhat hidden. When you check which type of application you want to proceed by, what you get is sort of the pop-up box that gives you an explanation as to what's needed for a desk application. And the same for when you're doing a hearing. Like Patrick had mentioned, this is sort of the whole driving force behind combining these forms is so that an individual could use this one application form to do both a new application, let's say of guardianship, in conjunction with a review of an existing trusteeship order and an examination and approval of accounts. So all of the account combination options are listed in this 1.2 section of the application form. Depending on what the user checks off for what type of application they're doing, certain sections throughout the remainder of the application form will automatically collapse as being not applicable. So if they're only doing an application for trusteeship, all of the guardianship specific sections would collapse. The rest of this information here, the following information, has pretty much stayed unchanged. But when you get to section 3, now this is the section where we're going to be entering in information for existing or current decision makers as well as for proposed decision makers. So on a new application, this is where they'd be entering in all the decision makers and checking the appropriate boxes. Obviously, if it's for a new application of any type, you wouldn't have anything in the currently section, that they would all be in the proposed section. On the electronic forms, which is what we would encourage people to do, is to complete these electronically on the computer, because you have these features where you can add additional sections for more names if you need it. So if you're wanting to have 2 or more decision makers, you can just click this button and it'll add another section, another field to complete. Like I mentioned before, some sections, if they're not applicable and you're checking no, then the section will collapse and it cleans up the form a bit more. And if you're checking yes to something, you have the option to add additional names if you want. In the section for family members and other interested parties, one thing that we had added here is the wording has not already been listed in any of the questions above. To sort of reduce that duplication, on some applications, you could be entering in a name at least 3 times if they're the applicant as well as a proposed decision maker and a family member. Now, by putting this in here, once they've entered the name in once, as a decision maker, if they're a family member as well, they wouldn't have to enter it in again. And these sections remain primarily unchanged. However, the not applicable buttons there, so that kind of cleans it up and reduces that need for people to put in NA or not applicable. This section for guardianship. So if you were not doing a guardianship review, then 5.1 and only 5.1 would collapse. I should say if you're doing, let's say, an initial application for guardianship, 5.1 would collapse, but the remaining section of 5.2 would stay available for the user to complete. And that's all driven by that first question at the front there, 1.2, that asks what type of application that you're doing. The rest of this basically is pretty much the same. What areas of authority are you requesting? Section 5.3, which is dealing with that whole, if you have more than 2 guardians, how are you requesting them to be able to act? The working group had thought that we should maybe change that to sort of follow a little bit as to how the wording is in the trusteeship section. And then we've also just sort of hopefully made things a bit more clearer. So if there's only one guardian that is or will be appointed, then they can click the not applicable. Or if they want the guardians to act separately, then no, we don't want an order. And then if there is more than one guardian appointed and they want to have them to be able to act jointly in some areas or separately in some areas, or a certain guardian has authority in specific areas, they have these different options that they can fill out to have that order sort of specific to how they want things to look. One of the suggestions was when you're asking for a review of an order that you can change the time frame. On the old form, it was static at so many years. And as we know, for urgent orders, for example, that's a shorter time frame by, within 90 days, or if there's certain months. And so this drop down has been added, defaulted to years. 6.1 under the trusteeship section, that's the same thing as within the guardianship section. If they're not doing a guardianship review or doing an initial application for guardianship, then this section 6.1 itself would collapse, but the remaining parts would stay available for the user to complete. Nothing was really changed in the trusteeship section here, other than clarifying that the bond or security for a non-resident trustee is also applicable to an alternate trustee. So the wording alternate trustee has been added to those areas there. In any of the sections, if you're hovering your mouse over the actual section of the regulations is what will show up just sort of as an explanation to that question. And again, another reason why we would encourage people to complete these forms on the computer rather than printing it out and doing a handwritten copy, because obviously those little pop-ups aren't going to show up. Same thing here, drop down to change your time frame if you're requesting a specific review period. I'll just mention in this section here, because it is going to look like it's a bit of duplication, that this question with regards to proposal for a periodic review for examination and approval of trustee accounts, it shows up here in the trusteeship section and then shows up again in the actual examination and approval of trustees section. If the user checks the appropriate boxes in question 1.2, where they're doing a review of trusteeship as well as an examination and approval of trustee accounts, this 6.4 actually hides or collapses. So they don't actually duplicate the information if that's the type of application that they're doing. Section 8, the listing of the documents that are submitted with the application. Based on some suggestions, we have added the specific form numbers behind a description of the forms. Certain sections, if it's not applicable to an application, you can check the box and it will collapse. Here also, previously granted trusteeship order or previously granted guardianship order. We added in that wording, hopefully to make things a little bit more clear for people, that if they're doing a review or if they're applying for a guardianship and there's an existing trusteeship order in place, then you may want to include a copy of those orders. The remaining of the form is pretty much the same. Again, check boxes if a section isn't applicable. The last thing that's sort of new to this application form is that we've clarified here in 10.2 that if you are requesting any kind of specific direction, approval, or dispensation, that the item must be included in your draft order. That wasn't on there before, and so oftentimes we would be maybe sending a draft order back to a lawyer saying you still need to include this in that order. So that is now our new application form. Like I said, it's combined new and review. Form 19 is no longer available for use. The affidavit. So Form 15 has now been combined with Form 20. Similar types of changes at the beginning with regards to the applicant's namespace being expanded for those long names, or if they have a lot of aliases. The one thing here on this form is that the swear versus affirm has now been changed to a drop down, with the default being to swear, so that we no longer have to do that specifying and having the commissioner for Oaths crossing out one action or the other and making those initials, those changes. The other thing here too is that if they do affirm, when we get to the last page, it's also added the statement that is required that you are verifying that this is a person who satisfied you that they are able to affirm to the contents of the affidavit. Again, in questions 1.1 and 1.2, this will really sort of drive what sections of the form will remain open and which ones will collapse. So if they are making an initial application for guardian or trusteeship, or if they're already a guardian or trustee and they're reviewing an existing order or doing an examination and approval of accounts, they would select the appropriate boxes based on the application that they're making. The Section 2, which is the information required for an appointment of guardian. These are all pretty much the same. We have added, again, information on what we refer to as a hover bubble. Information from the Act that if people want to pull that up, they can read that and hopefully get some clarification if they have any questions with regards to the question. In Section 3, which is applicable to the appointment of a trustee, it was suggested that we add some examples of what some less restrictive and intrusive measures other than trusteeship might be. And so some of the wording, an enduring power of attorney and appointment of age benefits administrator, that's been added. And we've actually numbered this now as 3.7, which before it wasn't. Sometimes it was difficult to instruct changes that were needed to this section when it wasn't actually numbered. Excuse me. In working back and forth with the legislative drafters and their reading of the regulations in the Act, there were a couple of sections that have been now added to the affidavit. And it has to do with when we're reviewing an order, whether it's a guardianship or trusteeship. So Section 4 is dealing with reviewing a guardianship order and you're requesting to continue the order. The questions are pretty much the same as what they were before. I don't think there was any changes made here. But what's been added now is this Section 5, a review of a guardianship order if you're requesting to terminate the order. And so this is specific to if you're just terminating the order, and then you have these questions that that need to be asked. 5.1 has like either or, and then 5.2 same thing, and either or. And this is all based on recommendations from the ledge drafters and coming straight from the Act and the regulations. Section 6 is a new section, and that's with regards to if you're reviewing the guardianship order, discharging a guardian and appointing a new guardian. And there is a specific question as to why you believe that would be beneficial and that a new guardian should be appointed. And the same type of changes have been made in the trusteeship section. So if a review of a trusteeship order, you're continuing the order. A review of trustee and you're terminating the order, and then if you are discharging a trustee and appointing a new trustee. The section with regards to examination and approval of accounts, the request to dispense or with service or notice. And again, these can be collapsible if they're not applicable. Section 12 is another new section to this, and it is just incorporating the request that an applicant is making in the application form in section 10.2, putting that into the affidavit so that that information is sworn or affirmed to. And it is where you would enter information supporting that request. If it's not applicable, then that section becomes collapsible as well. Costs, the same thing. There wasn't any changes made there. In the signature section, so now whatever was selected on the first page has automatically come to the last page. So this has been changed to affirm. And this is the statement here that I was talking about that is automatically entered in, that the Commissioner for Oaths certified that, and then they put in that satisfied that he was a person entitled to affirm. So that's all kind of driven from what is entered in there on the first page. So that's the affidavit. Form 16, the notice of application. So that's been combined now with Form 21. So Form 21 is now obsolete. Same kind of changes in the top. This section again is what drives the rest of the form. So depending on what type of application, if it's a new or if it's a review, whichever buttons that you check here, that will tell the form which sections to collapse and which sections to leave open. I should also mention that in here where it says space of the adult, when that's put in here, the form has been set to automatically populate into any other spaces that the adult name is supposed to go into. The information in the form has stayed the same. It's just the functionality to incorporate both a new as well as a review form. Everything else has all pretty much stayed the same. One difference is here in section 7. Before it was just a checkbox, and so if the box was checked and it was a trusteeship application, and they're requesting to sell land owned by the adult, then you check that box. And if it wasn't requested, you didn't check the box. Just because of the way that this form functions, they had to add sort of these radio buttons, and so now when we are completing these to send out to family members, if it's not applicable, we'll check the not applicable box. If they're requesting the authorization to sell land, then obviously we would check that box. And now we have all of the forms listed here rather than not including, financial statements in the guardian's record of decisions. And that's the new Form 16. 17, Form 17, which is the notice of application and hearing, has now been combined with the Form 22, the review sort of equivalent. Again, it's the same as kind of Form 16, the only difference being this section here where they would enter in the date and the location and the time for when the hearing has been set. Other than that, it's like the other forms, it's driven by what kind of application is being checked off in section 1. And here the two sections, one for lawyer's information and one if by chance they're not using a lawyer to assist with this application. The draft order is the last form that was combined. So Form 18 has been combined with Form 23. Form 23 is now obsolete. It looks a little busier to start out with because it has all of the information from both of those two drafts combined into one. And so it looks a little bit overwhelming to begin with, but again, they can now have an order ending with the appointment of a guardian in conjunction with a review of a trusteeship order or vice versa. Everything looks pretty much the same, other than it does include all of those clauses, just dependent on whether it's an initial application, you're reviewing an application, are you continuing the order, terminating the order, all of those clauses. So we just have to be careful that we're, removing the information that is not applicable to a specific application and only including the information that is. Everything else in this draft order has all pretty much stayed the same. There were a couple of things that we've added in the trusteeship section. Again, it deals with the non-resident trustee, made it clear that is also applicable to an alternate trustee. And these sections themselves are new to the draft orders. They weren't in there before, but we've added them now. And so if it's not applicable to a specific application, they're easy enough to delete. This has been kept in a Word format so that changes can be made easily. The other thing that we've added at the bottom of this draft order is, again, anything that's being requested in 10.2 of the application. Want to make sure that that gets transferred over into the draft order, and so we've got a specific section for that. The trusteeship plan, Form 34, there were the big change that was recommended for the trusteeship plan was making that clear again that the non-resident trustee bond or security requirement is applicable to alternate trustees as well. And so that wording has been changed in question 29, which we'll get to. But some of the functionality that we've changed is for these questions 3 and 4, for example, if they don't own land or the applicant doesn't know, if they select no, as you'll see later, that schedule is actually removed from the form. So there's a bit less paperwork, things that you don't have to necessarily cross off or put in not applicable. If some sections, such as this bank account, if they don't have a bank account and you select no, then again, we've got that collapsing feature to sort of clean up the form and just make it a bit more clear. So you'll notice that throughout the forms that some sections will collapse. The Schedule 1, Schedule 2 will be actually removed if they are not applicable. Worksheet Schedule 3 and Schedule 4 for the income and the expenses have still stayed, and if they complete the worksheet, those amounts will automatically transfer to the applicable questions within the form. Everything else has stayed the same, like I said, except question 23, if they select no, that collapses. And again, here in question 29, talking about the bond or other form of security, alternate trustee has been added to that as well. And you'll see that Schedule 1 now, because I had checked no, that schedule has just been removed from the form altogether. And everything else in here has stayed the same. The inventory form, so because this is a sworn document, the same type of feature has been added in with regards to the swear versus affirm. We've removed that second section for the date that the inventory is as of, and just have the ones area there. The chart on the first page has basically remained the same. As the user completes information further out throughout the form, those dollar figures will transfer to this chart on the first page. So based on recommendations from the working group, these sections have been cleaned up and sort of combined a bit. And so this one section to do with land owned by the adult now is more of in a chart. And depending how many properties a person might have, will determine how many charts are needed. So a description of each land or property is required. And these are set up to automatically calculate values if there's a co-owner involved or if the adult is the sole owner. 100% of the property value or 50% of the property value. That'll all be calculated as the user inputs information. The bank accounts, the financial assets have been simplified. So now there's just the two categories: accounts held at financial institutions and then other financial assets. So it makes things a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier. Again, they're in the charts, be able to enter in information, and amounts will automatically calculate based on the adult's share of those assets. Other assets have now been sort of combined just into this one chart, includes all of them. So vehicles and everything were sort of combined with the other property like farm assets. And then the liabilities chart has remained unchanged. The working group had suggested to sort of clean up the sources of income. And so the list isn't quite as long as it was before. Some things have been sort of grouped together, such as AISH and income support. And then we've got these other areas here for anything that's not specifically listed above. And same for the expenses. The overview of accounts is the last form. The changes to this form just really make it coincide more so with the inventory. So things in these first couple of pages look the same. They didn't really change. The category listings here in the summary of assets and liabilities were changed to match or mirror what was in the inventory form. Another suggestion from the work group was to add this, that a statement summarizing the receipts and disbursements is attached as an exhibit. And if that box is checked, that chart just collapses or disappears. The reconciliation, it's just been kind of cleaned up a bit. An explanation has sort of been added here at the top of the charts. The information is still being requested. They're still requesting an explanation of the change, just sort of cleaned up. And question 5, other matters, has been reworded just for clarity. The compensation, again, kind of cleaned up, and options put in there for clarity for the user to be able to select if they're not requesting compensation. If they check that box, then that collapse. And again, the sworn is automatically chosen here at the end based on what the user selected on the first page. So that is, those are the forms. I think Ellen had mentioned that the individual forms are on our website, and there is work being done to get them removed from some of the other pages on our website. That should hopefully be happening by the end of this week. Other than that, that's that. And when we get the bundle coming out, it would be, we'll be able to use just the one bundle as opposed to some of the others that we had before in the past that had to be specific because we had those individual forms for review and an initial application. I'll hand it over to Susan now.
Thank you so much for going through the forms. That was very helpful, I think, for everyone. Just wanted to say a little bit about some of the work that we're doing to promote the new forms and the changes. We do have a grace period for the old forms that are circulating through the system as well as to June of 2021. So we are doing some work to promote the new forms, such as today's event with the Lunch and Learn, which we are recording and will be available. I know there's a lot of people away at 1GX, and apologies because I think we had 2 invites open, so some people actually switched into there. So we have done a couple of articles for with the capacity assessment forms We'll be also doing articles for the Law Society. So there's some information that's gone out to the Law Society about the new regulations, just alerting people to that. We also want to do another one of these lunch and learns at our next Clerk of the Court OPGT meeting, just to let those folks be aware of the new forms. They know they're coming. We've been telling them for a long time they've been coming. So we will be doing another session that's specifically geared to that. The next date that we're looking at for the OPGT Clerks of the Court has been proposed as October 1st. We're just looking at that date to see whether that's going to be something that we can work with. I want to open it up now to questions to the group. I'm going to ask if you can use your Q&A or your chat, and we can go through those. Now, some of your questions that you may have today may take a little bit of time for you to think about or to put together. So what I'd ask you to do over the next little while as you start to use these new forms, you know, and we'd like to start to gather questions, even recommendations for next time round when we do this amazing exercise again. But we would like to just sort of collect some of the questions that you may have, put together a small group of folks and include our legal colleagues on that, go through some of those questions, and then get back to you in a few weeks' time. So I'll be sending out just an email after this lunch and learn, just requesting your questions, your feedback, if it's not just off the top of your head or you've been saving this up for today to ask us. So I'll just turn it over to folks. We did have a comment from Amanda Tucker saying, these are amazing forms. You're all incredible. Thank you. So that is just wonderful to hear. Thank you very much for that comment, Amanda. Anyone else have any questions? I'll just wait for a minute or so. Okay, question, do we have clarity yet on what the protected classification is for court application documents? That's an excellent question as we're working through on the classification. On some of them, you'll note they have protected B when completed, but we are probably going to have to go through and review those in light of our new classification of documents that have come through. So thank you for that question, and that's one we'll get back to you on for sure.
I noticed a question here, when will the bundle be coming out? We're working with Service Alberta right now on the application bundle. Priority is sort of on the application bundle or kit to be used by private applicants, but they are also working on an application bundle or kit for Public Guardian and Public Trustee applications. Right now, the timeframes that we've been kind of given is in the new year, but we're hoping that that'll be maybe a little bit sooner than that. We don't have a firm date as of yet, but for sure, when the bundle is available, we'll be letting you know.
I think we also had a question about when the forms are blank, what would the classification be at that point? So again, we'll go through and just make sure we have all that information for you. Craig Colson asked, is it definitely protected B when blank? We'll have to get back to you on that one because that may be, if it's a blank form, it may be A. So we'll get back to you on that. Okay, I do want to thank everyone for participating today and for signing on. Again, please look out for that request for your questions. If you weren't able to attend or your colleagues weren't able to attend today, Standby also will be sending out a link for the recording and a next date. So if the recording doesn't work out, because we're just technical newbies here. If the recording for some reason doesn't work out, we'll send you also the date for the next opportunity for you to participate and hear about all the great work that's been taking place. And again, thanks so much just for walking us through the step-by-step changes. Really appreciate that. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.